Shalom, shalom, shalom. Baruchim habaim. Welcome. Welcome to Awakening Torah Mussar Mindfulness. I am Rabbi Chasya Uriel Steinbauer, the founder and director of the Institute for Holiness, Kehilat Mussar Mindfulness. I'm delighted and full of energy and excitement, and just it's a privilege and an honor to be here starting the whole Torah cycle again for the year, starting with BEREISHEET, known as Genesis in English. So today is now Motzei Shabbat. After Shabbat, here in Israel, it's already Sunday morning, just 8 minutes past. And we covered the first Torah portion, BEREISHEET, in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 1. Through chapter 6, verse 8. And we're taking on a whole new way of learning and practicing this year. We are exploring a new path, which is, as you know, if you've been following the podcast or the blog on the website or joining us live stream right now on our YouTube channel, please subscribe. Or maybe you are seeing this on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, welcome. This is a great place to spend the next hour learning together, really being on this path towards holiness, and to be able to practice and develop together. So if you're not familiar of what Mussar is and what mindfulness is, you're welcome to go to our website at kehilatmussar.com, where we basically kind of, go through all what that means. But what's special this year that we're doing differently, because as you know, if you've been following, in the past 3 years, we've always looked at the Torah portion from the lens of Mussar Mindfulness. And we would notice, for instance, the behavior of our ancestors, what we could learn from them, how we could apply it to our own situation and lives. And as you know, in the past year, in 2023 to 2024, it was all in honor of basically recovery, coping with survival, and maybe for some people healing from the genocide of October 7th, 2023, on Simchat Torah in Israel by Palestinian terrorists, which was really by Iran and its proxies. And so the whole year was dedicated to what can we get out of the Hebrew Bible, out of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, in order to cope and to support each other and to strengthen. So this year we're on a new path. I'm excited to say it's a huge production. So I'm going to try to keep it under an hour. But the goal this year is really to introduce this path, what really is Mussar Mindfulness, become familiar with some of our sages, ancestors, and leaders, teachers of these paths and traditions. And defining a central middah, a soul trait, a personality trait from each Torah portion, and to really focus on practice, which will be mindfulness meditation, but also takeaway practice, which might not be meditation. It may be one of the many modalities and practices, but not only from the Dharma, the Eightfold Path, but from Mussar, which there are plenty. So I will go ahead and give you a summary of the Torah portion in a little bit. First, we're going to start by requesting from God, from Hashem, and our ancestors that they lead us on this path, one that is part of its vision and hope, not only liberation, but shlemut and kedusha, wholeness and holiness. Now, we'll talk about what those terms mean as we unfold and go through this during the year. I just want to briefly say, for those of us following the Hebrew calendar, that we are now in the 25th day of Tishrei, and we are in the new Hebrew year. just Taf Shin Pei Hey 5785. So yeah, we're going to just jump in and try to cover what we can. We're using Mussar as the background. We're going to dive into very classic texts from Pirkei Avot, often translated as the ethics of the fathers, of the forefathers, guarding, grounding principles in Judaism. From chapter 6, verse 6, there are essentially all these certain ways, sometimes a list of 48, sometimes 51, depending on which era and who you're listening to, that want to guide us in acquiring Torah. Now, what does it mean to acquire Torah, which is different than learning Torah or studying Torah? Torah, I'm taking here to mean the whole wisdom tradition of Judaism, from the time of the Hebrew Bible, the written Torah, all the way through, not just the 5 books of Moshe, but also the writings and the prophets, known as the Hebrew Bible in academia, and then the Ora Torah, which, and also included, I would even say, in the written are the Midrashim, the Agadot, the kind of stories that help frame and understand the Torah. The oral tradition coming out of the Mishnah, which is around 200 CE, and the Babylonian Talmud, also the Jerusalem Talmud, but the focus in Rabbinic Judaism favors the Babylonian Talmud, again, coming between 600 to 900 CE. And in Judaism, like any ancient tradition, similar to in Theravada Buddhism with the suttas, there's what we call the early, the early texts, and then the unfolding of course, it's an oral tradition before it even begins to be written down. That oral tradition flourishes, and eventually, with the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in the modern day land of Israel, you begin to have really a codification and writing down, and this whole corpus and instructions and way of being is what I call Torah, right? This is what we mean by acquiring Torah. Now, Mussar, the path of Mussar mindfulness, is about this acquisition. There's learning from the text, and then there's a way that one has to acquire, to embody, to internalize. And that is the path that we also learn from mindfulness, taking from the ancient traditions and ancestors of Theravada Buddhism to learn what wisdom we can from that tradition to strengthen our Mussar practice and path and understanding. So I want to jump in with you, essentially. But we'll be taking from Pirkei Avot, either those 48 or 51 ways of acquiring Torah that's usually studied in the Jewish tradition between Pesach, Passover, and Shavuot, the Festival of Weeks. However, we're going to take the whole Torah year, which conveniently, the Torah portions usually are somewhere between 50 and 52 of them. So this is our first sitting of the year. And naturally, to acquire Torah, the first thing that we're going to jump into, after I give you a bit of a background of what is Mussar, is Talmud, is learning, study. Okay, that'll be the first. And then we're going to go into the middah of zerizut. Zerizut means enthusiasm. And we'll delve into what that means in the Mussar tradition. It's not like your English American definition, for instance, no matter where you're joining us across the world. And we'll delve in. We're also going to meet one of our sages, the founder, the patriarch of modern Mussar, Rav Salanter. We'll get to know him a little bit. how he embodies and really exemplifies Bereishit also. And it's a big ambition. It's a lot to cover. Hopefully we'll be able to jump in and do so. It's all a trial, right? So if it ends up being too much material, then we'll scale back. So what do I need to say to you from the very beginning? Mussar, just like Theravada Buddhism and then in Judaism, there are ancient understandings, and then Middle Age, there are different segments of time, like the Middle Ages, and then during the Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment, and coming into an Enlightenment in general. And then there are modern day understandings. And throughout Rabbinic Judaism, you have different understandings of things. The same too with Mussar. When Mussar first starts off, and you still have this sometimes in traditional circles that really understand Mussar as not how most modern practitioners and even my own institute would use the same language and understanding of what it is that we are actually doing as a path, as a way of life, which this is. So what do I mean by that? So for instance, if you jump into Rav Hillel Goldberg's work, right, that comes about learning the heritage of the Mussar movement, he will really give you more of the traditional view, which is that as part of its, I don't want to call it a goal, but as part of the path, there's this real understanding that you are heading towards, it's almost like warfare. That's the language I'm going to be using, and that's what gets used, that we're at war and there are certain toolboxes in the toolbox and the practices in the Mussar tradition, in order to perfect ourselves internally, our middah, our soul traits, our personality traits, in order to lead to shlemut. It's almost like there is an end goal, an end game. The way that a lot of people misinterpret Buddhism, this idea that there's an arrival, like you'll lead to liberation and you'll have arrived, which is clearly not the case if you actually study and practice. It's a path, and it always will be that one has to always practice. So I will just give you some brief language that gets used in the traditional sense. Real understanding of Mussar comes from the whole rabbinic tradition, even starting with texts in the Torah and Proverbs and Pirkei Avot. A real sense, the word itself, Mussar, is used in Proverbs to mean instruction, this sense that it's an ethical path, it's a body of literature, it's a whole bunch of things, right? But really, it's all more than that too, right? It's a tool for stretching, at first the Jew, but now everyone is welcome in the practice beyond the verbal knowledge and the mechanical observance of Torah. And that essentially, it's not a philosophy or a theology. It's more than collective wisdom of the thinkers. It really is a path that gets practiced and laid out. But it really is this sense in the traditional literature before World War II, the Shoah, and even, as I said, in more traditional communities, that there is this Yetzer Hara, this evil inclination that we are to battle against, and that Mussar itself is a battlefield in order to live out Hashem's will, God's will, and it forces us into a struggle between everything that urges us to depart the path, the way of Torah, and lots of what are called weapons, essentially, are the everyday lessons of human encounters that we run into. Everything seen as potential curriculum for Mussar. Lessons are learned in what they consider the human perfection of our ancestors in the Torah, Agadah, Midrash, such as Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. This is their language, not mine. I will touch upon what is the shift in modern times now. Every lesson in ethics derived from human interaction, every lesson in spirit from prayer, every lesson derived from the introspective practices of like Heshbon HaNefesh journal. But it really is this resistance and a battlefield, right? It's a struggle. And they consider it a war for human perfection. Again, not my language, the traditional language, right, of early texts. And what they would call human perfection is what we call shlemut, which is wholeness. Now, in my understanding of wholeness today, it's not human perfection, okay? So, even Rav Salanter in his wonderful writings really says that the war is set, this language of battle. And to understand where it's coming from, you have to understand the context in which the modern Mussar movement emerges, right? So Rav Salanter is alive at the time in Lithuania, where the movement and the growth of the Haskalah movement, right? Jewish enlightenment is growing and pushing against traditional observance of studying Torah, of observing Judaism. We are losing hundreds of thousands of young Jewish men who are being conscripted at the time in the 1800s into the Russian army, into their schools, where they're basically kidnapping Jewish boys and forcing them to convert into Christianity, forcing them to serve. It's well known and documented that the numbers can be up to 50,000 young Jewish men. So he is, in a sense, in a battle. He's in a battle to save bodies and souls. And he sees this, that we have to bolster our strength inside of who we are, really getting to know who we are, what our weaknesses are, in order to strengthen that, in order to be able to observe, in order to be strong as Jews and in Judaism. So it really is, the language is constantly one of struggle between the urge to evil and the urge to elevation. So I wanted to give you that background because I think it's important to understand how things change, which is not something that everyone likes to use that language, right? In ancient traditions, there's sometimes an urge to act as if things are always the same and always have been. So let's take a look at that. Excuse me. In modern Mussar practice, which I would say basically comes out of probably starting 1980s, 1990s, but really takes hold from one of my teachers, from Dr. Alan Morenis, who in the late 1990s, early 2000s, learns about Mussar as a spiritual discipline within Judaism, and authors a book called Climbing Jacob's Ladder about his encounter and finding Mussar. He considered himself a spiritual orphan in Judaism, that his generation, coming out of the Shoah, really the whole Jewish community, especially in the diaspora, were all about basically strengthening themselves after the genocide and the Shoah, and strengthening the modern state of Israel, very communal-based institutions, and survival. And so there wasn't paying attention to individual cultivation of one's soul and curriculum in life. It was about, how are we going to keep Jews alive and to strengthen us and to grow again. Just to give you an example, the number of Jews in the world today is still, which is I think around 17 million, is still not the number of Jews that existed before the genocide of World War II by the Nazis and their supporters. So that's to give you an understanding of what genocide does and how it takes generations, many, many years to even begin to slowly recover, at least numbers. So this is what he encounters, discovers Mussar, and creates also the Mussar Institute based in Canada and the United States, where I encountered him before there was a Mussar Institute, and asked him to take me on as a talmidah, as a student. And so it's where I really jumped in and learned the tradition, where he learned from Rabbi Per, his teacher, and I learned from Alan. And then eventually with my colleagues and friends, for instance, Rav Micha Berger, who just came out with a book recently called Widen Your Tent, and Rav David Jaffe, and others, where we really strengthen each other and are, like, in some sense, the disciples of the modern generation of really bringing Mussar. So what does the Mussar Institute do with Alan Moranes? They start reaching out to Jews all across Canada and North America, United States, and in particular to Jews who are not Orthodox. So it's the first time that Mussar is being disseminated as a daily discipline to grow, to cultivate oneself as their own individual curriculum, as a soul. And this really, the language begins to change. We're no longer at a war, for instance. We're no longer battling Haskalah, Jewish enlightenment. I mean, if anything, you could say we're battling assimilation, but the Jews who are, at least the ones in North America who are learning this modern Mussar, don't have a problem with assimilation. If anything, majority of them come from assimilated mixed family households, both Jews and non-Jews. There's been a total shift in who is the population of the Jewish people in the diaspora. That's not the case here in Haaretz, in Israel, where I am, right? We're a majority of Jews, marry Jews, and keep Jewish families, right? And so, but the language still shifts, and also the practice and the attention, okay? So there's no longer a battle with the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination inside. And there's no more a sense that you're at war and for this human perfection, right? It's in a sense, I would say, it gains some humility in the sense of realistic, long-term vision and goals of what is Mussar as a path and what it can really accomplish with daily practice in a VAD, in a group that supports each other, in Havruta with a learning partner, with a master teacher who guides you. That institutional support, right? The communal support. So there's a big shift in looking at how we can be on a path. There's no arrival, on a path towards wholeness, in the sense of you begin to feel a sense and development of the middah of menuchat hanefesh, of equanimity, knowing who you are. You're really grounded in your Torah-centered values, right? Like what I like to call TorahDharma values, right? Really learning from traditions that are around us, right? But being solid of who we are, living out our values. There's a sense that we need to learn sometimes from other traditions around us about how to care for the self, of self-compassion, the literature and everything that begins to develop, mindfulness, really bringing in awareness that slightly gets cultivated in Mussar, but the concern in Mussar is your relationship to others, how you treat others, and your relationship with Hamakom, your relationship with the divine, with God. How are you serving God, and how are you in the relationships with other human beings? There's less, if almost negligible, literature until modern times on one's relationship to the self. Although you will constantly are working on yourself, there's not a sense that you need to befriend yourself, that you need to be kind to yourself, that you need to practice self-compassion and cultivate that. So we learn a lot, from instance, from Theravada Buddhism, from the Dharma, from mindfulness, to bring that in, from Dr. Kristen Neff's work at the University of Texas, Austin, on self-compassion. And so Mussar now, as it always has been, open in the sense that it believes, there's the famous saying when Novardik and I believe it was the Kelm School were kind of spying on each other, and one of them was watching a fish kind of decompose from the ceiling, and the other students ran back to their teacher and kind of naughty tell on them, look what they're doing, they're crazy, they're sitting watching a fish decompose, which, believe it or not, is also there is a path in Buddhism that actually does that with human body, watching it decompose. But anyway, so the teacher says to the student, well, does it work? Right? What was their intention? Why were they doing the practice? Were they trying to cultivate a real humility and understanding that we will die someday, that this is all impermanent, that there should be a hakarat hatov, a gratitude for the way things are, that all, in the sense, comes from God. And so that applies today. We learn from many different people and traditions to strengthen our understanding of this path, this way of life. So that addresses the change in language. Let's look at a little bit more about what Mussar is. I'm not going to go too much into it because you can look on my website and you're welcome to read more about it. But basically, I mentioned the two dimensions of heading towards shlemut, of wholeness, and kedusha, holiness. They're really two dimensions of the same phenomenon, in the sense that we are on this path to become living embodiments of our ideals, of how we treat others, how we treat ourselves, how we treat God in that relationship. And the more we transition from partialness, a sense of brokenness, towards wholeness, right? We become vessels for holiness. And this is part of the path. We learn so much of our ideals from our ancient ancestral tradition, from the Torah, and as Torah, as I told you, meaning the whole instruction. It's not a small thing. In the 5 books of Moses, for instance, Chesed, meaning loving kindness, appears 248 times. That is an ideal of ours. That is what we are to be living and cultivating, right? So many things. Basically what we found, and what you may be wondering, which we'll get to Rav Salanter, why did this even develop? Well, it's always been there. If you study the Torah, there's always been morals and ethics deeply infused in the observation of being a Jew, and that one couldn't be in service of God without being good to those around them. And in particular, it was a violation against God and the Brit, the covenant with God, if we treated others poorly. So many laws, like for instance, in Kitavo, Kitetse, or Kitavo, I think it's Kitavo. There were like 74 mitzvot, and in just one Torah portion. And it's all about how we treat other people, right? That we're not to be indifferent. So it is my and the Institute for Holiness, my institute, it's our intention, our kavanah for this year together, for us to bring this wisdom and goodness of Mussar mindfulness, Torah, into your life, to acquire it, right? In the sense of really embodying it and having it become internalized. So one of the ways that we acquire Torah is really by toiling in it, right? We go through the texts, we go through the practices, and really understanding that the whole world present before us is an opportunity for growth, for practice, that nothing is to be shunned or avoided. It changes the whole outlook. Like, for instance, if Buddhism is going to bring for us, right, the Dharma, that there's dukkha, that there's suffering. And suffering here can mean dissatisfaction, the unwanted, that which is like pain and suffering. It could be a whole array of things. It could be simply that I didn't get the amount of sleep that I wanted and how I allow it to affect me all day, right? Mussar comes along to say that dukkha is welcomed, that it's a gift from God, and it's there to help you grow in your curriculum. That it's okay to say, I'm suffering right now. I recognize, I have awareness that I'm stuck in the dukkha, right? And I'm going to practice. And so they really do strengthen each other and provide excellent insight into our condition and the path. So I'll just close with saying that we've moved away from this idea that you're going to complete the path, that you'll come to some final destination, that you'll be perfect, that that you'll be able to master, for instance, all the 48 ways listed in the Mishnah and Pirkei Avot of how to acquire Torah. Even the Vilna Gaon, great Jewish sage of the 18th century, comes along and says, no one can master all 48 pathways. Don't even attempt it, okay? It's impossible. And so what he then advises is that you attempt to, all of us will be able to strengthen and be good at a few. But what he emphasizes, because everyone likes to emphasize at least one, is ohev et habriot, which is to love all creation, your fellow humans, but I would say all that's been created. It's an obligation, right? And so we all know what we can bump into and rub into in our own personal curriculum when we go to love, whether it's a fellow human being, an animal, an object, whatever it might mean, the state of the world, accepting things as they are. This all brings up our own spiritual curriculum, which is part of the path, the gaining the awareness of it and working on ourselves. So you don't study Mussar mindfulness, you do Mussar mindfulness. This comes, of course, from Rabbi Moshe Brody, who likes to say, you don't study Mussar, you do Mussar. And we really are following Rabbi Shlomo Walby's teaching that you're building an interior world. Some of us like to say some of that world's already there. It's a gift to Hashem. It's just really removing any obstacles to allow that world to emerge. That can get into theoretical speculation. Are we born with a certain state? Does it all have to be cultivated and nurtured, or is there something with it? So let's move into the first of acquiring Torah, which is Talmud, study. So the first method by which we acquire Torah and therefore Mussar mindfulness is the spiritual practice of study. And we learn two things, essentially, that acquiring Torah should not be confused with learning Torah. Learning Torah is a method, it's a practice, while acquiring Torah is a path. Some call it a goal. I like to say it's a path. It's a way of being. It's like the Eightfold Path in the Dharma. It's not as if you'll arrive and it's done. It's not a goal. It's just a vision, an internalization, a way of being. So a learning Torah obviously involves study, while acquiring Torah involves the path of personal transformation, of practice, of cultivation of our own spiritual curriculum. Now, obviously, the Jewish tradition, even as Buddhism, really values knowledge and the study of ancient texts. And it's really seen as a very high value. It's where we learn our moral and ethics and begin to internalize them if we weren't raised, for instance, in the tradition or are coming from outside of it. It's where we learn right from wrong, morality, good from bad, all the blueprints, essentially, of the universe and how we view God. I might sneeze. I have a bad cold. Give me 1 second. So century upon century, Jews have been passionately engaged in the study and learning by themselves, in chavruta, in a pair, and in groups. For instance, there were Batei Mussar during Rav Salanter's time, where houses of Mussar, where people went to just practice and learn Mussar together. What's important about this study, obviously, is for us to realize, and this is why even Mussar came into being, that study alone sometimes does not translate, most often doesn't, to a Talmid Chacham, to a wise student, right? A wise student in the tradition of Mussar and Judaism is one that's constantly seeking, observing and reflecting on what they learn from others and so forth, right? But just like Torah, just like the midot, can be put to a negative use, like what we call the the path of the Dharma, that there is it's like the midot, the sense that they call it, and the word is not in my head right now in English, the near enemy, that you could have something like anava, of humility, right? And the near enemy would be arrogance and also low self-esteem. And they often emerge like, I'm really meek, I'm really humble, like the voice of too much, right? That just like Mussar comes to show that just like with Torah study, and this comes from the Vilna Gaon, that it can be compared to rain. That we can't assume Torah study guarantees that one who pursues it will be a refined person, and that the rain comes to the entire land equally, but its effect depends on the recipient. If the land were sowed with wheat, it will sprout wheat. If it's sowed with a poisonous plant, it will sprout a poisonous plant. And so too with Torah. If the heart is good, if the person has a moral compass, what we called in the Torah, Yirat Hashem, fear and awe of God, what Avraham will come later on to say, and also the midwives in Egypt, when they say there's no fear of God here, they're saying there's no understanding or living by what's right or wrong. There's no moral compass. So if the person has that, then that person's reverence in studying Torah will become greater. But if the person doesn't have a strong moral compass, really understanding right from wrong, and comes to Torah study and attempt to acquire it, right, that person will fail. They end up maybe going through a lot of theoretical speculation and pondering, and actually resentment tends to grow. So all this is to say that we have to, it's almost like we need a precursor, a step before this first step of Talmud, or maybe at the same time, which is for it to be healthy and nourishing, we have to not only elevate our midot, our character traits, and improve our behavior, but we need to understand the moral compass and our values. So the rabbis, our sages, provide an additional at least 47, if not 50, additional practices towards acquiring Torah, because they knew Talmud by itself, learning, study, is not enough. And so one of the key practices I want to leave you with, and then I'm going to move into Rav Salanter and also our Torah portion with Zerizut, is that we are enjoined to learn from everyone. And that could mean actually learning from everyone, which you should attempt to do. I would carry around a little notebook. And what did you learn from this person? Or what could you learn from this person? But also taking an opportunity to, if you are learning from one person, for instance, learn from that entire person. Don't just see them with your own eyes. Learn from the entire person. Okay, so that covers what I wanted to say there. Now, in our Torah portion, BEREISHEET, quite a lovely Torah portion. God creates the world in 6 days. On the 7th day, the Shabbat, God rests and declares it kadosh, holy. God allows Adam to eat from all the fruits, but not from Eitz Hada'at, the tree of knowledge. The serpent convinces Hava to eat some fruit from the Eitz Hada'at. Hava then gives some of that fruit to Adam to eat. And as consequence for their behavior, I'm going to word it as consequence, not as punishment. Okay, when we talk about karma, we talk about there are consequences for our behavior, and we may receive those consequences immediately, or we might receive them way down the line, right? So the consequence is that they actually have to leave Gan Eden. Chava gives birth to 2 sons, Cain and Hevel. They both offer sacrifices to God. It's a form of gratitude, but only Hevel's is accepted. Cain is livid, and he ends up committing to what the rabbis will call homicide, not murder. We'll talk about that. Cain denies responsibility, saying to God, famous line, am I my brother's keeper? The path of Mussar Mindfulness will directly say, yes, you are your brother's keeper. Right? It's about bringing God's good to others. It's about bearing the burden with others as a path. So God basically says, well, there's consequences for you negating your responsibility to being your brother's keeper, and you now need to go wander the earth. You need time to go wander, do some walking meditation to come to the realization that you are your brother's keeper. Chava has a 3rd son, which is great tikva, great hope there, great zerizut. We'll talk about that. His name is Shet. Okay, the Torah lists then 10 generations from Adam to Noach, which will be our next Torah portion next week on Shabbat. God starts to notice that people are starting to behave badly, except for Noach. Okay, so lots of things created here. What do I want to say about this Torah portion? More importantly, I want to say the middah that we have chosen, and we got a number of votes from people, and I'm going to ask you to do the same for next week for Noach, is read the Torah portion before Shabbat, and then write to me at Rabbi Chasya at kehilatmussar.com, or put it in the comments here on our YouTube page, or even however you want to reach out, and tell us what you think is kind of the master middah of the soul trait, the personality trait that is encompassed in the Torah portion. So for us, the majority felt that zerizut, which translates as enthusiasm, balanced enthusiasm, has 2 components in the path of Mussar. The first is wise discernment. One needs to deliberate what it is that they need to do. Is it appropriate? Are they the appropriate wise person to do it? Is it the right time? So forth. And once they've made that decision, yes, I am the right person, this is the right time, and I need to do this, they are to do it immediately, right? So it's and follow through and finish it, okay? So there are multiple components to being balanced in zerizut and enthusiasm. So of course, we're going to start off with Hashem, with God, right? Why not? I will say one thing about zerizut, just like learning Torah, okay? When we are considering this soul trait, this personality trait, and like any of them, we are taking it as a given that there is a good moral compass already in hand and that effective deliberation has taken place. If someone does not have a good moral compass, they just grew up, unfortunately, either in an environment or family that was not emphasized or taught or nurtured, and they know that. They gain that self-awareness in adulthood, and they need to start cultivating that through study and learning, through being around other examples who really exemplify a good moral compass. So when we have that proper positive balance enthusiasm, then with that good moral compass and that effective deliberation, what we call wise deliberation, the action is done with full throttle, right? Once the review consideration has been made. That's very important for the middah of zerizut. So let's just quickly do a perusal of this Torah portion. It's very clear to us, right? What does it involve? It's unbelievable how it's so clear here. And I love the language used. For instance, the Jewish Publication Society, if I can come up with it quickly, really lays out for us the three, what we witness here, the principle of seder, of order, of deliberation, of direction. It's all extremely clear by God. God has decided to create the world, and it's all laid out. So if we're going to look at zerizut as your prime model to emulate, it is God creating the universe, right, in this story. Okay, I like to joke that my 11-year-old son, of course, who is used to things coming immediately because of the technology, instant gratification, says to me, no, it's not zerizut, there's atzlanut, there's laziness by God. And I said, how is there atzlanut? My God, with God. And he said, it took him 7 days. He should have just done it in 1 day. So you got to have a sense of humor on this path, right? So I just said to him, I said, please. Okay. So, all this is emphasized. There's a basic idea of design, of completion, of even perfection. So God is this amazing model, creative, life-giving, sustaining energy. This is good, right? As we come to know it. And the creation of Adam and Chava is good at first, right? It's ordered. There's a certain. But what's very interesting, we're going to have a shift immediately, is we have to question Adam and Chava. Do they really have a rule of law? Do they really have a strong moral compass? I would argue no, especially before they eat from the Eitz Hadat. Okay? Often the tree of knowledge gets and even God will say out loud here, and I want to make sure that it's said exactly as God says it. Yes, right here. Chapter 3, verse 22. Adam chaya כאחד ממנו, לדעת טוב ורע, ועתה פן ישלח ידו ולקח גם מעץ החיים. And the Lord God said, now that man, the human here, Adam, has become like one of us, knowing good and bad, what if he stretch out his hand and also take from the tree of life and eat it and live forever? I don't think it's knowing good from bad necessarily. It is starting a development of the consciousness, slowly a moral compass, and understanding that some things are forbidden, that we are to respect and follow rules. That knowledge starts to come from to fruition here. So we see with Adam and Chava that there isn't actually any deliberation, right? No wise, appropriate deliberation. They're not balanced in zerizut. They just see, it's delightful, I want. It's total reptilian animal brain. nice looking fruit or whatever it was, which we don't know exactly from the tree. And she wants to share it. I mean, it's kind that she wants to share it, right? So she shares it, and there are consequences for the behavior. They do follow through and they do it, right? But then what happens, right, with the consequences? So then when they go out and they have their two sons, Cain and Hevel, God forbid, and they both give sacrifices, but Cain's is not accepted. He goes ahead and kills his brother. Now, the language among the tradition is that he didn't murder him, that it was homicide, because he didn't know, he'd never seen murder before. He didn't know how a human being would die or that it could. And so he didn't know whatever he was doing, which isn't described in the Torah. We don't know how he murdered him, right? I'm using the language murder. We don't know how the act happened of killing him. We just know that he killed him and then he avoids responsibility, right? So he knows that he did something wrong. There's even more development of a moral compass. The same thing with Adam and Chava. That's why they hide. That's why they actually sew for themselves the fig leaves to cover themselves. There's that executive functioning brain slowly beginning to emerge, right? But what does he do? Just like Adam, when God calls out to him and says, "Why are you hiding? What did you do?" And then he's like, "Oh, she ate from the tree and made me do it," right? Negating personal responsibility. This is what happens with Cain. Cain says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" When he's like, God is like, "What did you do?" The blood of your brother is screaming out from the ground. The ground is screaming. There are consequences for your behavior. They're not going to go away, right? So, which is kind of amazing. I mean, even if you look at Cain's response in chapter 4, verse 13, he says to Hashem, Gadol avoni, so, right? He says, this punishment is too great to bear. It almost feels like he didn't know. He didn't really understand what he was doing. He acted out in anger and rage and didn't understand that he was taking his brother's life, that his brother wouldn't return after the fight was over. So he goes on. So that I'll talk about zerizu, enthusiasm. When it's not balanced, right? The middah here, if we're looking at the middah of zerizu, it's someone with way too much zeal, which I would call often the reptilian brain, where there's just no space between the match and the fuse. They just do, right? There's not wise, appropriate deliberation, right? Then you have this person over here where my son likes to call the atzlanut, the laziness. We don't have to even use the term laziness. It's just a heaviness, right? They're not deliberating, or maybe they're stuck in deliberation. Oh my God, I don't know what I should do. You know, that whole monkey mind. And they don't act because they're so weighted, often in the deliberation stage, often out of fear, maybe the fear of being successful or even failing. So Cain just way too much, right? And then we get to, I mean, there's just so many stories of our ancestors slowly starting to build more executive functioning, slowly starting to build more moral compass slowly. Rule of law does not get established until God decides to save the children of Israel and take them out of the institution of slavery, which we will deal with in a little while. The final thing I will say here is that we are introduced at the very end, of course, to Noach, whom we are told that the wickedness of the human being on earth is spreading everywhere. And God starts to regret. God starts to regret the balanced zeal, the balanced enthusiasm that God had and used to create the world and the human as part of it. And decides almost in like a reactivity, I will blot out all the human beings from the earth, right? I regret that I made them. And then the last pasuk coming in, of course, is V'noach matzah chen b'nei Hashem. But Noach found favor with the Lord. Why does Noach find favor out of all this mess and reactivity to what's going on? Why? What's going on? Right? We'll address that next week. Just to, So I'm going to move us into Rav Salanter. I want to introduce you to this sage. He really is the yesod, the foundation for why I'm even sitting here with you today teaching. I do want to, in his honor, bring something that, as far as we know, only he created. First of all, he taught females as well as males, which was not being done in his community in the yeshiva. I'm sitting here today as a beneficiary of that. But even more so, let me get to his, I don't know if I can find it here. He really molded himself with integrity, a human being between herself, like she and herself, and helpfulness, right? That you should be of service to others between Ben Adam, the Chavro, between other human beings, and Betachon, right? Trust in God between human and the Almighty. So he brings this, as far as we know, he tied intellectual to communal and innovation by defining Jewish communal leadership as the Torah. And to the best of Rav Hillel Goldberg's knowledge, Rav Salanter was the first to use the Torah, the Torah perspective, to connote a preeminent Talmudic scholar's application of his knowledge to personal and communal issues. So let me put that in everyday language. Our highest scholars, which ranges today, and obviously in Judaism and in the communal world, our highest scholars apply their knowledge, the gifts that they've been given, and everything, their experience, and also what their education, everything they've learned, to personal and communal issues. So in no way am I claiming that I'm a Talmudic scholar. I obviously have learned Talmud Torah, and I study it daily, but I don't consider myself a Talmudic scholar. But I do see myself walking on the footprints of Rav Salanter along with my other teachers and colleagues, which is to say that I'm using my now, what a gift. It's almost 24 years of Mussar practice and teaching. I'm using this knowledge, my own personal practice and leading Mussar Vadim groups throughout the world to address personal and communal issues, to address not only our own personal growth, but that we live out this path that our greatest desire should be what? What is Rav, his name's escaping me, Shimon Shkolp's mission statement for us as Jews and his seminal text, Sharei Yosher, in the introduction. He says that our greatest desire should be to be of service to others, to bring benefit, the exact languages, lehetiv, to cause good to another, that we are to be on this path. And so I see myself in that footsteps, following Rav Salanter, right? I'm like on a beach, really regarding this Torah perspective, right? Involving myself. I mean, this is what we did this whole past year of addressing the genocide of October 7th and the ongoing wars against Iran and its proxies, and the total ongoing craziness of the Jew hatred and Israel hatred across the world. I have to speak up. I have to use my knowledge and my rabbinic education and my leadership and my Mussar mindfulness and the whole institute in order to better, right, the both personal and communal issues. Okay. Oh, I have my hand up. So he brings that. Okay. So who's Rav Salanter? I should start from the beginning here. We say from the famous texts of Rabbi Akiva that there are 70 faces to Torah. And it's often been written about Rav Salanter that he's one of the few who actually can fully illuminate even one of them. He really was the face of Torah. That he illuminated to the world was Mussar, the ethical and moral emphasis in all literary expressions of Hashem's will, right? Torah, Talmud, and its commentaries. He embodied the fullness of Mussar teachings, and his greatest achievement, it's larger still. Bezrat Hashem, God willing, I will be able to accomplish this in my lifetime, which is a long line of his wondrous disciples, right? That can just pass on this amazing path and tradition, right? So let's tell you a bit about him, right? He has many disciples, right? I'll just mention a few. Basically, giants trained in Mussar schools, but not only giants. He had like everyday students also. He was kind of amazing. Let me tell you a little about him. He was a tremendous Torah scholar. So I have such a bad cold. I hope all of you are healthy. So he's known as Israel ben Ze'ev Wolf Lipkin, for short, Israel Salanter, right? Born in 1809, died in 1883. May his memory be for a blessing. He actually dies in Germany, but he's born in Lithuania. And he really is the father, as I said, of the Mussar movement, and what we today would call Orthodox Judaism, but really it was the only Judaism. At the time, you do have Reform obviously beginning to emerge in Germany. And he was a famed Rosh Yeshiva, a Talmudist, famous for the place of Salant, where he comes from. That's where he gets his name. He came under the influence of Rabbi Yosef Zundel of Salant. Okay, he's an amazing sage. He basically, as a young boy, was sent off to study, and marries young. Also, there's so many amazing things I could share with you about him. But from the very beginning, what he was most attracted to and what he followed is that he watched the sages around him in order to learn how to behave. For instance, Rav Zundel would go in the middle of the day of learning in the Beit Midrash, and he would disappear for like an hour. And Rav Salanter's like, he wasn't Rav Salanter at the time, but Rav Salanter, the student, the youth, he followed him, and he found him helping out a poor man, a peddler essentially, pushing a cart up a hill. And he would go and leave for an hour of the Beit Midrash every single day to do this. This is not a small thing. Okay, first of all, we have somebody who's willing to interrupt Talmud Torah. If you know anything about Orthodox Judaism, especially coming out of that time, and even today, there's this emphasis sometimes that nothing should interrupt Talmud Torah. He interrupts his study for an hour a day to go help a poor person push a cart up the hill. This just tells you how balanced and more and ethical his models are, okay, where he's coming up. One of the key things he does during the cholera epidemic of 1848 is he tells all the Jews that they need to do whatever is necessary on Shabbat to keep themselves alive and to care for others, and not to have a non-Jew do it. And that the priority to save a life takes over all others. Even on Yom Kippur, he ordered the Jews to actually eat in order to maintain their health, because if they didn't eat, he guaranteed that during that epidemic, they would die. There's some story that he even went up onto the synagogue pulpit on the bima and recited Kiddush and drank and ate as a way to show, I'm doing it, you do it. And so many things that he basically saw that the Jews around him were either being, God forbid, kidnapped by the Russian Tsar, forced into conscription, or they were going through Jewish enlightenment and assimilating, or moving into non-observance or other religions. And he really felt like Torah study itself was not going to strengthen the 19th century Orthodox Eastern Europe, especially Lithuanian Jews, and that they needed Mussar. They needed that instruction, discipline, and conduct, right? And so he really started stressing the interpersonal laws of the Torah, that they have as much weight as the divine obligations, and that adhering, for instance, to ritual aspects of Judaism without developing one's character was just wrong, and felt like someone was actually not being observant if they were not also growing and working on themselves. So it's clear that you have a real understanding and concern that what Judaism really is about is personal spiritual transformation, right? That the core intention can get lost, right? And the rituals, the festivals, the liturgy, the performative aspects, the other laws. And he came around to say, you have to be doing both, right? He begins to create a whole understanding of our interior world, that there is something, an understanding of what we would call subconscious motivation. This was actually an understanding before Freud came to his work, that he really felt subconscious motivations were often not apparent or under a person's control, meaning they weren't having mindfulness, awareness of the thoughts that were going on. And that when someone does not have this awareness, they're likely to act out in ways that are not in alignment with their values. And so he said, how on earth can we expect people to control their actions if they're actually not even aware of conscious thought and even subconscious, which we start to develop practices to dredge up, to bring up the subconscious, right? And so he really develops this whole shared vocabulary and understanding of these ethical teachings in the realm of the subconscious to improve behavior, what he calls character traits, right? What we call midot. He knew that most people would be too embarrassed to study limud hamusar, the study of ethical teachings, in a Beit Midrash. So he moved them into the Beit HaMussar, the house of the ethical teachings of Mussar. And both men and women. Now, we don't know if they actually met in the same house. There might have been just a woman's house and just a men's house. That we would have to trust towards anthropology and history. But he knew that everyone had to be working on themselves, not just men, right? So some of his famous disciples, including non-rabbinic disciples, are Naftali Amsterdam, Yitzhak Blazer, Eliezer Gordon, Yaakov Yosef, Yerucham Perelman, Simcha Zissel Ziv, and Yosef Yozel Horowitz, and the lay people included figures such as the banker Eliyahu Elinkan of Kretinga, and the tea magnate Kalman Zev Wysotsky, the tea that we drink today, which is kind of amazing. Every time I have that tea, I smile, knowing that he studied under Rav Salanter and benefited from him. Okay, he has many of his articles were published in a journal called Tevuna. In 1878, they were collected. He has his Igeret HaMussar, an ethical letter, published in 1858. Also, his disciples collected some of his writings in Or Yisrael, the Light of Israel, in 1890, and even published some of his discourses in Even Yisrael and Eitz Peri, again, 1853 and 1881. I think what I think it's most important to walk away with Rav Salanter is that his emphasis that we can't be observing Judaism without emphasizing the laws and the practices of how we treat other human beings. I'm going to add to that today. This is my contribution, bringing in what I was strengthened by, bolstered by mindfulness practice of the Dharma, is how am I treating myself also? There really aren't laws in the Torah about that per se, that you shall be kind to yourself. You shall not beat yourself up. All those sorts of things that I think are so needed for today's audience. So he really brings this understanding that between human beings and human beings, we have to, that holiness, Kedusha, is only unified with the spiritual, the ethical, and the psychological. And that is his contribution to us that really allows someone like me today to go, okay, also a human being between him and himself, or she and herself, and also, of course, our relationship with God and following those rules and laws. I think I had one final thing I wanted to share with you, but I might not be able to get to everything, which is okay. There's so many great stories about him. If you want to learn more, there's a great book called The Fire Within by Rav Hillel Goldberg, and also Illuminating the Generations. I will be taking stories and traditions from them for us to jump in. I want to just see if I can close with one thing. I'll close with I have so many favorite stories about him. Why are these stories important? It's part of our path to learn these stories about how Gedolim, how great people live and how they treat other people and treat themselves too. And I'm really strengthened by Rav Salanter. He was so ethically centered. He was so upright, such a strong moral compass. I feel like he's a descendant of the midwives, right? Either Hebrew midwives or Egyptian midwives. It's just so profound, knowing right from wrong and not even questioning it. So these are very important. They strengthen us. So I'll close with one of the more famous stories. It's a little sad for me. He's so amazing. So on his deathbed, he died on the 25th of Shvat, the Hebrew month of Shvat, in the Hebrew year 5643, which is 1883. The Jewish community had a sign. He was in Germany at the time, and it wasn't his home. He's from Lithuania. They had assigned a watchman to stay with Rav Israel. And he was ill and alone. He was away from family and his disciples, and they felt that he shouldn't be unattended. And on the night that he actually sensed that it was his last night, the watchman became very frightened, and he was afraid to be alone in the room with a dead body. with the corpse. So he, being so emotionally intelligent and astute, Rav Salanter, total understanding what's going on with the other person, he literally picked up what was going on with the person and felt that his own personal spiritual burdens, like you might think that he wanted to go through reviewing his own lives and going through teshuvah of repenting. So his personal spiritual burdens, he felt, should not take precedence over the needs of another human being in front of him. And Rav Salanter decided to talk with that watchman. He tried to soothe him. He tried to give him compassion and comfort. He tried to ease his fears, to convince him there was no danger in remaining alone with a corpse. I can't think of a more powerful story. Could you imagine, right? Recognizing on your deathbed that whoever's with you is totally fearful. He's so gadol. He's so, not everyone I obviously would be able to do that. And maybe they do have their own personal needs that they need to address in that moment of right before death. But that story always stuck with me. And that's how he lived his life. He was always other-oriented. And so he is the father of the movement of why I'm here today and why the Institute of Holiness is presenting this. So I left you with the one practice. The other practice that is so important, if you don't have this practice now, is developing concentration, clear, focused mind. It's of deep importance in the path of Mussar Mindfulness. Matter of fact, I would say without developing it, you can't be on the path. It's the first and most essential quality Mussar calls upon us. Rav Salanter called it sensitivity practice. Today we call it awareness or mindfulness. It's this clear focus awareness to develop the traits of the soul, right? And so when we are able to observe in our mindfulness meditation our own awareness, we're able to see honestly over time who we are, what is our regular habituated behavior, the steps we need to become closer to our highest values. And we get to really notice that a thought is a thought. An emotion is an emotion. A state that arises has a certain shelf life, and this will pass. We begin to learn the impermanence of it all. We also begin to learn that the self is not such a self. We might want to call it unfolding servant towards God, right? And others. But we get to see what life is really about. Without it, we continue blinded, stumbled in confusion, not knowing who we are, why we behave the way we behave, and how to begin to practice, to become the best version of ourselves. So Rav Per, may his memory be for a blessing, was one of my teacher's teachers, Alan Morenis, and he introduced the practice of wearing the rubber band. My rubber band says right here, Almani Moda. About what am I grateful? I don't even need this, right? Because as a religious Jew, I pray 3 times a day. I wear a head covering, not a hair covering. For some of the religious men in my life, they wear seat, the prayer tassels, and they can hold those and mitzvahs. But Rav Per, who was giving at the time a Chiloni, a secular Jew, Alan Morenis at the time, told him to wear a rubber band, and that anytime he wasn't living in his values and came to awareness of it, so that in itself, you have to come to awareness, you will feel that rubber band. It will gently remind you of this path and what you're practicing. So I recommend that as part of the practice, but really it begins with the mindful meditation. Starting 2 minutes a day if you're new, working up as much as you can. So we're going to move into that right now together. It's going to be a short meditation because I've been talking a long time with you. I'll try to cut it shorter and leave more time for practice. But basically what we want to do, I'm going to assume we're all beginners, even if they're advanced students here, because we want to teach the principles. So the first thing I need to say is that if you are having any acute depression, anxiety, trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, moral injury, anything of the sort, I recommend talking with your therapist or doctor if you are ready to begin a mindfulness meditation practice. Because the literature shows that if you already are coming in those states, they can get worse or get, what's the word I'm looking for? Triggered. So I'm going to assume that you are aware of this and you're entering this with your own safety. So for those of you who maybe are not in the acute stage, but are aware that you have a history of depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder, you want to be aware that you can have moments where you shift into what I call movie making, a narrative, a story that can cause harm and suffering. So we want to become awake to that. Open your eyes, look at the screen, look around the room, wherever you are, to ground yourself. Hold your feet on the ground. Sit like me on the edge of the chair, really weighted to feel yourself embodied, heavy in the sit bones. I feel like I'm going to fall off this chair. The first thing we want to do, if you feel safe and comfortable, is to close your eyes. If you don't, just lower your gaze like this, so there's less visual stimulation. And we want to invite ourselves completely here in this shared meditation. Mind, heart, soul, spirit, body, everything on this chair, seated right here, right now. And we're going to bring our full loving attention to our breath. So inhalation, exhale. Inhalation, exhale. And this last one, allowing the exhalation to be double the amount of time if you're able. Inhalation and exhale. Fully arriving here. And the first thing we want to do to start building our training of our mind, our awareness muscle, is to check in with ourselves. Well, the first thing we're going to do is a body scan, find out how's the body doing. So you want to start at the top of the head. Notice what's going on with you. And now we're just noticing. We're not reacting. We're not trying to make a sensation go away. We don't have to tell ourselves a story about what sensation we're experiencing in our head, in the back of the head, in our face, in the cheeks, in the mouth, in the jaw, inviting ease and relaxation. Just noticing what's real for you. So I'm noticing my left side of my neck is tighter than my right. So I just invite some comfort and ease, relaxation to the area. Nothing more. I don't need to fix it. I can just notice it. We move down the shoulders, upper back, the chest area. Just noticing what's here with you. Moving down even the sides of the arms and underneath in the armpit. Down to the lower part of the arms, to the fingers, the hands, the wrists. Moving back into the lower back. Into the stomach. And the whole groin area. The sit bones. For those of you living with chronic pain or even having acute pain, simply acknowledge it. Don't push it away. Don't be in denial. Just say, ow, that hurts. I noticed that. Know that you can address it later, maybe icing it or giving it some heat therapy or maybe some gentle movements. Moving down your legs to your knees, the lower legs, to the ankles and your toes. Now noticing, bringing your loving attention to any emotions that arose with you scanning your body. It's called a body scan. And often in a body scan, we can have emotions come with whatever sensations emerge in the body. They kind of go hand in hand. So, for example, say theoretically with that sore neck on the left side, I could be a little irritated, frustrated, maybe even feel sorry for myself. There could be a story that starts to emerge with the emotions. Mostly it's just annoyance that arises, right? So I just notice that. I notice what emotions arise with my sensations in the body. And I later on, after the meditation, can journal on this and see what is my habitual emotions with different sensations in the body. Like, for instance, when I take a deep inhalation and an exhalation, you will always find me with a smile, even when I'm feeling very sad. Because it brings me such joy to exhale. I feel my shoulders lower. I feel so grateful to Hashem, to God, for the gift of oxygen, that I'm able to take a deep breath and relax. So just noticing what emotions, if any, arose for you to any of the sensations in the body. And the final thing you want to bring your loving attention to are the thoughts that sometimes accompany those emotions and sensations. So, as I told you, if I'm starting to feel annoyed with my neck, I can go into a story about it. Oh, it's my neck again, or whatever it might be. That's what we call the third arrow, right? The first is the stimuli itself. I'm having neck pain. The second is my reactivity, my annoyance, the emotion with the sensation. And the third arrow is the story, the narrative, the movie that I add to the annoyance. Right? All that goes on to just cause more discomfort, more dissatisfaction, more dukkha, more pain, suffering. It's just noticing what your thoughts are, if any. What's here with you right here and right now. Not trying to create thoughts, not trying to create a story. Just notice whatever emerges. It could be as simple as, oh, I forgot to eat the green beans tonight. Whatever arises. And this is the beginning. Mindfulness of breath, mindfulness of body, mindfulness of sensations, mindfulness of thoughts that go into this amazing life-giving practice of mindfulness meditation, which strengthens and is foundational to Rav Salanter's first step in the cultivation of Mussar as a path of sensitivity. You can gently and slowly come out of the meditation. If your eyes were shut, allow the light to filter back in. I always give a bow to Hashem and to our ancestors for these practices and teachings, a bow to each other for taking refuge in community, being here to strengthen one another and support one another. It's very important. So this is what we set out to accomplish today. It was our kavanah, our intention, to jump in and start this new path with BEREISHEET for the year of really delving into what is Mussar, what is mindfulness, what is this path, becoming familiar with one of our sages, Rav Salanter, defining ancestral middah of BEREISHEET, which we decided was zerizut, enthusiasm, and touching upon some practices that you can take home with you and engage. So learning from everyone, keeping that notebook. What did you learn from them? What could you learn from them? And having your rubber bands or your seat or your kippah, head covering, hair covering, whatever brings mindfulness to an awareness to your behavior, right? What's going on with the thoughts also, which is why I encourage you to begin to develop a meditation practice of mindfulness meditation with the Institute for Holiness. If you're new, if you're not, to continue and strengthen your practice. And we jumped into Pirkei Avot, first learning about Talmud, about study and learning to acquire Torah. Torah meaning the full instruction. I call it TorahDharma. May Hashem continue to strengthen us and to continue to be on this path together. Very excited and looking forward to this year. Please, as I said, send me your suggested middah, soul trait, personality trait that will shine in the Parasha of Noach that we are to read next, coming for the next Sabbath, the Shabbat. We accept your sponsorships and your donations in memory of someone, either in memory or to honor who's living, to sponsor this weekly public offering so that we can continue to do so here at the Institute for Holiness. You strengthen us, you strengthen the Institute here in the Holy Land and Haaretz, which is, as you know, we're all having a hard time taking it one day at a time. So whatever you can donate to help out with, any amount is accepted and appreciated. Reach out to us with the donate button at kehilatmussar.com. Be in touch if you have any questions. And I look forward to being on this path and way of life with you. Wishing you all Shabbat Shalom if you're still in Shabbat. Wishing you Shavua Tov if you've left Shabbat, for all of us from Europe, way over into New Zealand. Hi there, Kiwis. Looking forward to continuing. Take care.